Okay, we're continuing Kuf Chaf Halacha Vav and Zayin. I'm going to give a recap first of some points you made last time, because it's really a continuation of that, and then continue on to today's, what we have to talk about. We're talking about Keilim that have more than one layer, which is to say they're not made of two different materials that are blended together, but there's distinct layers that the material is made from. The Shulchan's case was a barrel that's made out of wood. It had a metal band going around it. So there are two very distinct layers. One that would need Tevillas and one that would not. In that case, wood and metal. And two of the points that we spoke about over there that are going to be relevant today are that when a coating is linoi, the coating is just for decorative purposes. We ignore that completely. That layer doesn't count. You don't even tevel without a bracha. Completely ignore that layer has no significance. The Dharma spoke about that at the end. And the other was that what happens if we have two layers, and one layer is the maimed for the other one, and whichever one you want doesn't make a difference. One would need Tevillas and one would not. So the Gra said, which seemingly was the reading of the Shulchan Aruch also, that we ignore the maimed. We only care about the layer that touches the food. Whichever one it is, whether it's the chayiv and Tevillah or not chayiv and Tevillah, we completely judge it by that. We ignore the maimed that played this role. Like in our case, the barrel, the metal bin is completely. We ignore that since wood touches the food. That's what counts. Wood does need Tevillah. And the Shach said, quoting Beis Yosef, said that no, we are choshesh for the maimed in both directions. So choshesh for the maimed if the inside is metal and the maimed is not metal, we say don't make a bracha because maybe it's not chayiv and Tevillah. Maybe we should follow the maimed, and the opposite. If the inside was wood and the outside was metal, then instead of saying don't tevel it at all, you should tevel without a bracha because maybe we should be choshesh for the maimed. Okay, so we're choshesh for the maimed in both directions. In both cases, essentially we do Tevillah without a bracha. Okay? The Gra. The Shach. The Shach said that. The Shach quoting the Beis Yosef, and the Gra is saying basically what Shulchan Aruch seems to say is that we only care about what touches it. Okay. So now, those are things we mentioned last time. We also mentioned, which is what we're going to start for today, is that the Gemara seemingly talks about this case. The Gemara had like one line to talk about this case. The Gemara talks about a case called Moni de Kunya. It's a cheres kli, a ceramic kli, coated with lead. And the Gemara says, the Gemara has two opinions, and the Gemara says, the Gemara has a question about it, and the Gemara says, you need to tevel it. Meaning tevel it with the bracha. It's chayiv and Tevillah. And the question we asked last time is, that's what the Gemara says, and that's what the Mechaber says in the very first din in the Simon, in Kuf Halacha Aleph, he said is, Moni de Kunya needs Tevillah with the bracha. I mean, it's a straight out Gemara. The question is that the Ramah says over there, we passed it when we said it then, we said, Yesh Amrim, the Keilim HaMetzukim Ba'avar, Afil Mibifnim, if a Keilim, meaning cheres, that's coated with lead, even on the inside, Yitba B'loi Bracha. The Ramah says you should do without bracha, B'chei Noigim, that's what our minhag is, we tell you without a bracha. So what happened? The Gemara says straight out that case, Moni de Kunya, needs to be tevel, meaning with a bracha. But why does Ramah say that you tevel without a bracha? Where is it coming from? What could be? The Gemara says it would basically like a one-liner in the Gemara that you should have feel. Okay, so the short answer is that the Ramah's case that he's talking about is not the case that the Gemara is talking about, and the strongest explanation for that is why what the Ramah is talking about now, what the Gemara is talking about, is because in the Ramah's case, somehow the coating in the Ramah's case was linoi. The Gemara's case of a coating was not linoi, and the Ramah's case was. The Ramah comes from, it's based on a Hagoy Smak. It says Smak over here, but it really means Hagoy Smak. It has to do with the Lashita, so it's really Hagoy Smak, it's German parrots, who says this, he says this case, you should tell you ach b'loi bracha l'visha en masum ki im linoi. They made just linoi, and as I told you at the beginning, things that are linoi don't get Tevillah at all. So we're choshesh maybe that it's linoi, and therefore we do Tevillah without a bracha. Okay, so it's not the case of the Gemara. The Aruch Shulchan explains the Gra's Maram is that this. The Gra says it also that the Ramah, in the case of the Ramah, was in those days the glaze was only on the inside of the kli. Now the Ramah says afilu mibifnim. He means is, as opposed to something else, but he means that the glaze is only on the inside. In the case of the Gemara, the coating was on all sides. It completely enveloped the whole kli, and that's the case of the Gemara that said the chayiv and Tevillah, meaning with the bracha. The Ramah's case, they were only coating on the inside. And the Aruch Shulchan says, he says, how come the person only put the coating on the inside? Why didn't he put it on the inside and the outside? Obviously, the kli is perfectly fine without a coating also, and therefore, it's just linoi, and if it's linoi, we can ignore it, or in this case, we'd be cautious to ignore it, and therefore we say is, we're ignoring it, and it is, you do tefillah without a bracha, because maybe it's a cheres kli. If we can ignore the lead that's on the outside, then it's a cheres kli. It doesn't need to have a little.
On the contrary,
Yeah, what?
the inside to be glazed to protect the kli.
So, you're saying that if it's on the inside,
Only the inside, yeah.
that's the part that touches the food. Okay, we're going to talk more about what that means, hopefully, when we get on. Okay, maybe I'll answer your question. Okay, now there's another sheet, another hezber from the Chacham Sodom. I'm not going to tell you what the hezber is because I don't. People connect it to what the Ramah says. I think it has to do with something we're going to say later. Okay, so we're going to follow what the Gra says and the Shulchan says that the Ramah means is a kli that's only covered on the inside and somehow being coated on the inside only makes it limit. We'll get that in a second. Okay. So now, if we knew just that much, if we stopped here and we knew just what you could read here in this good book over here, then you would say is that China that we have. What's China that we have? When we just pause for a second just to tell you what that is. China, what we call China, means a cheres kli. It's a ceramic base. The bulk of the kli is cheres. You can try some tests here if you look at it yourself. And it's coated with, it's glazed. It's glazed from the wood glass. It's coated on all sides with glass. The glass is fired onto it. And so if we were to know just what we know so far, just what I told you so far, that the Ramah is talking about only the case where the coating is on the inside, when we would say inside means the part that touches the food, then we would say there's no problem. We would for sure tell it with a bracha. There wouldn't be a question because our China is coated on all sides. Okay, you could see it yourself if you want to play now or later. We'll need it more for in a second. It's coated on all sides. So we would tell China with a bracha. There wouldn't be a question about that because it's coated on both sides. So if that's the whole nafkamir, the Ramah just means coated on one side, then we would be finished and the story would be over. We'd tell China with a bracha. Okay? So the reason to think otherwise, I'll stick in one other thing, is the Gemara was talking that it was coated with lead. Lead, of course, is chayiv and tevillas d'oraisa. The Shach says, which is seemingly obvious, or I'm quoting from the Shach to feel a little more credible, is that lead or glass is the same thing. Glass is chayiv d'oraisa and lead is chayiv d'oraisa, but when the Gemara was not particularly talking about lead, it happened to be. That was the situation they discussed, was one that the coating was made out of lead, which is chayiv d'oraisa. Coated with glass, like we have, is just the same. Okay, there's really no reason to be mechal between them. Okay, so what's the reason to think that maybe you shouldn't tevel, or maybe you should tevel without bracha? Because Rabbi Krieger brings here a prima gadol from Aruch who says, Glazier Shalanu, our glazed Keilim, Bifnim Ubachutz, if it's on the inside and the outside, or just on the inside, blood bracha. He's in the middle of discussing tefillah for a lot of things, so he's like telling you the thing and then what you do with it. He says you tefillah without bracha, even if it's on both sides. The prima gadol making a point. If it's Bifnim Luchut or Bifnim Ubachutz, if it's on both sides like ours, you do tefillah without bracha. Okay? Now, so he says that, and it's brought here right on the page. So, okay, that's a reason to not tell you, but what does he mean? Okay, what's going on? What is he saying? Again, the Gemara said that if you coat the cheres kli with lead, you chayiv in tevillah. Which we said the Ramah was only coated on the inside. So what happened to where's the Supreme Government coming that's saying that, no, even if it's on the inside and the outside, you're not chayiv in tevillah. So back to our question. So what's going on that he's discussing that means different than what the Gemara says? Okay, so I saw two possible explanations. One is, in Chokos B'Yamin, right here on the spot, he brings the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram is of course, in Aruch. He's not talking about Tevillas Keilim. He's talking about Hagalos Keilim. So Hagalos Keilim for these kind of Keilim. And he says if I had more time, we'd have it on the screen here. He says if you have a kli that's coated with lead, his case is lead, same idea. He says the Afapisha also mehituch avor, even though there's a melted lead coated on top of it, loy mahani hagal, you can't kasher it. Okay, meaning we ignore the lead and we consider what's on the underside. The ain boy mamashas ella seva ba'ama. Okay, it's not a mamashas, it's not considered anything, and we just look at it just as a seva. Yes, if it's a painted on coating on top. Okay, so what he seems to mean is, and we'll explain more in a second, he seems to mean is, it's because it's so thin. Okay, now in the Ramah we said the difference is whether it's on the inside or on the inside and the outside. The Magen Avram seems to say, and the Chachmas is connecting that to this prima gadol, and to this prima gadol over here also, means is that it's so thin that it doesn't count. Okay? That's one explanation. If it's very thin, then it wouldn't count. Okay, now, there's a pirush on the Isser Heter called Zer Zahav, in the bottom of the Isser Heter. He says a different thing. He says the reason why, he doesn't mean Pri Megadim, I don't know if he's before or after, but he is being Pri Megadim, but he says is the reason why our glazes don't need to be tiled is because he says our glaze, it's not a material that needs Tevillas Keilim. It's made out of, we once mentioned the sheet, he says it's made out of sand and I forgot some other things that he says, all things that are not chayiv in Tevillah. He says, so they just put it on the top of it. It's not chayiv in Tevillah. Those are all materials that are not chayiv in Tevillah. Now, I'm not sure what he's talking about, because it is true that you make glaze out of sand. It is true that you make it out of sand, but you make it out of sand that becomes glass. Okay, you grind it up in a very fine way, and then you put it into a kiln, and it actually turns into glass. I'm not sure what he means. Maybe he had different metzias. What he means that it's made out of these things. He talks about bittul and things like that, right? But we also do that. But we then fire it to make it into glass. You'll see it. I'll show you in a second about it. You'll look at the pieces. You'll see that there's glass there. Okay, and it's glass because that's what you do with sand. I'm not sure. But then he says another thing, that it's just he says they coat the ceramic with a liquid. Okay, I forgot the word, like a mayim balm. They pour like a liquid onto it to coat it. Okay, which sounds to me, I don't know what he had in his day, sounds to me like what we call a shellac coating, like you put on a ceramic, like on a mug. Okay, it's a shellac. It's like a liquid that's just painted on. That liquid tack is not chayiv in Tevillah. So we understand that if the glazier chalonu is not really glazed in the way we think of it as with glaze, but glaze just shellac on top of it just to keep the moisture out. So then taka we would agree that it wouldn't be Tevillah. Okay, but if that's what he means, that has nothing to do with us. Okay, if he said the glazier that they were talking about, but maybe the Pri Megadim and maybe those kind of people were talking about was a shellac coating, then it's true the din, but it has nothing to do with the metzias, because ours is really coated with glass. It wouldn't be negated. The question is, what would we say about what the Smuggler Avram says, that if it's very thin, then maybe that shouldn't count. Okay, maybe because it's so thin, maybe that shouldn't count. Okay, I'm skipping for Moshe said. I'm sorry for now. Which maybe fits in with the Zer Zahav. That's the truth. Okay, well, let's skip it. Maybe we'll come back to it. Okay, so the question is, what about according to this Magen Avram / the way he's explaining that, because it's super thin. Would that be engaged to us? And that, if you could, indulge me. These are all good examples. If you look at a piece of china from the side, a broken piece of china, you can take a regular one. This is not the best one. You look at a broken piece of china from the side, you'll see that you could see the glass. Okay, here you have to look at it this way. Okay, you have to catch the light. You could be able to see that you could see the glass layer on top of the cheres, and you could the edges over here. These edges like over here. We could see the glass in the cheres. Okay, but the greatest is my kids tell me that they didn't do it on purpose just for the share. But we broke. Okay. This used to be a salt shaker. Okay. This used to be a salt shaker. It used to be like this. You pour out the salt. Okay. It used to be a really nice salt shaker. And in this one, you could see it. And actually, what happens when this one broke, the glass on the inside shattered. Okay. It wasn't done very well. It shattered on the inside. You could see. Take a point of this. You could see in here the shattered pieces of the glass, like where the glass broke itself in half. And if you look at the layers, you can see the layers pretty well on here also. And if you look at the layers of the glass, so it's true the glass is very thin. It's true that what we're talking about is a very thin layer of glass on top of the cheres. It's true, but the question is, it's thin, but it's only thin in an objective sense. Relative sense, if you look at this plate, I mean, how thick is the plate altogether? So I don't know, is the glass 10% of the thickness of it, 20% of the thickness of it? So when we say something is thin, it shouldn't count. Seemingly thin should depend on the relative thinness to the thing. Okay, if you have a clay that's an inch thick and it has such a fine layer, that's one thing. But seemingly if we're trying to say it's ignoring it, it's so small we could ignore it, it should be relative. And okay, so I guess it's a judgment call, but to me it doesn't seem so relatively thin to this thing. Okay, so the truth is we really need to understand is what does it mean when we say that since it's thin, since it's such a fine layer, we're going to ignore that layer. So I asked some people, I said to them, Tell me something. No. I told you at the beginning that the Ramah says that when something is Lenoi, it doesn't count. And that the way he's quoting a smak who says that the glaze that we have is Lenoi. Okay? What's the opposite of Lenoi? Lenoi doesn't need tefillah. We know that. And something coating does need tefillah. Okay, what's the opposite of Lenoi? Lenoi means for beauty. It makes it beautiful. What's the opposite? Let's explain. What does it mean? The opposite of Lenoi, that's the thing that's chayiv in tefillah. Lenoi doesn't need tefillah, and the opposite of that does need tefillah. Okay, what's the opposite of Lenoi? Anybody want to get one? Functional. Okay, so when I asked people, they all gave the same type of answer, which is functional. What does functional mean? It means that it makes the kli do its job better. Okay, the way there's an Issa V'Heter. Okay, the Issa V'Heter is talking about these kind of cases, and it brings all these kind of machlekes in about what it is. Doesn't it? So he says in a whole bunch of these cases, what you should do is either do tefillah without a bracha, or tie it together with something else that needs tefillah. Okay, that for sure needs tefillah, because then you make the bracha on that thing, and it'll cover this also. Let's say you take a spoon, you'll tie it with a spoon, and then it'll cover that bracha. You have two choices. He says, but you should know. Then he has a different case, a different situation, a different kind of these layered cleats. He says, in this one, I think you should make sure to do the eitzah of tithing with something that needs a bracha. Remember, I gave you two choices for most of them. For this one, it's a really good idea to do it with one that needs a bracha. In other words, the case that I'm about to describe to you is one that it leans much more towards needing to deal with a bracha. So in this case, you're better off choosing that choice. Okay, that's what he says. So how does he describe it? So, close the place. I thought I had the word. Okay, he says, I thought I had the words. He says this, because in this one, the coating that's on there keeps the kli, the base of the kli from absorbing and getting stained from the food that's in there. Okay, so what is he describing? He's saying, in this case, which it sure seems to me like it's more not Lenoi, is because it keeps it from absorbing, it protects the underbody of the kli. So the kli does its job, it's a plate, but the plate is always going to get soaked with water and get dirty and stained, and this layer keeps it coated. Okay, so now, if that's the opposite of Lenoi, it means it makes the kli work better, it makes it more functional. Then we have to figure, okay, what happens with China? Okay, why do they put the coating onto China? If we want to say that it's thin over here means to say it's just Lenoi, it's not functional. What goes on when you make China? So it seems that there's different layers of China. Maybe you could broken into three groups. The finest China, what they call porcelain, the finest China. The glaze, the cheres itself is not porous. Okay, it's vitreous. Okay, it doesn't absorb anything. Okay, seemingly on those, the glass that you put on top of it, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but seemingly on those, you could say that on those, the coating is Lenoi. It just gives it a certain shine to it, but it doesn't need it for the kli. The kli doesn't need it. In the middle layers of China, like stoneware, the bottom layers of China, it's like ceramics, those, they are either completely porous or partially porous. And you need the layer on the top of it in order to make it vitreous. It makes it that it doesn't absorb, and it keeps your thing looking the way it's supposed to be. It keeps it almost exactly what the Issa V'Heter is describing. That it protects the kli from, not that it makes it work better, but basically in the long run it does. If you want your China to look like this, don't look at the crack part. If you want it to look nice and white or whatever color this is, you want it to look put together, you want a coating on top of it. Otherwise it's going to start looking like tomato sauce and whatever else you put onto the food, and it's not going to look the way you want it to be. Okay, so Lenoi over here is to say Lenoi would be is on something that doesn't need it for the absorption, it just makes it shiny and nice, it has a certain smoothness to it. Okay, that's Lenoi. If it makes it that it doesn't absorb, then that's not Lenoi. Well then is it going to be that it's going to depend on which China we have, whether it needs fuel or not? And maybe what's going on here is, and King Brother says, that the glazier cholanu, you do tefillah without a bracha, is because this ambiguity. Because exactly on some China, it serves completely Lenoi. On some China, it's functional. And that's exactly the kind of things that the Poskim are saying. The Gemara's case was, it was for sure there to help the kli. Okay, it was for sure there to help the kli, and it needed to be toivel. In ours, it's not so clear. In not in every case can you figure out exactly, is this thing Lanoi or is it functional? Because even within China, there's different layers, different types of it, and I'm sure I told you 3 different groupings, but there's probably 50 different groupings, if we really knew what we were talking about. And so therefore, that's why he says tefillah without a bracha. Because exactly these kind of things, these glazes they're borderline. Are they Lanoi? Are they being functional? And therefore we say, do tefillah without a bracha. Okay, so in that, that's how I, an understanding what Prim Gun says. Okay, there could be I'm going to offer you a completely different suggestion. Okay, completely different. This is saying is that thin, what's operative here is what the Magen Avraham says is whether it's thin, but thin plays a role in deciding whether it's Lanoi or not Lanoi, which is the way the Ramah heads in that direction. Okay, I forgot to tell you before I leave the Prim Gun for a second, Chasam talks about this, that the Kli that needs to that bracha, whether it's on the inside or the outside. And there are those who think that he thinks he's explained the Ramah. I have a feeling that he's more along the lines of the Pri Megadim. To say that he means that's what the Ramah means is hard to believe. Okay, but my feeling is that it's going that he's like Pri Megadim style. He doesn't say quote from him, he just says what he thinks it did. Okay, there could be another shot in these thin glazes and why does she have to feel that bracha? And that is, my question that I said to you, as I said, is shouldn't we look at the glaze in the relative sense? Think about how thick the glaze is relative to the cheres, the ceramic, the ceramic underbody of the kli. That's how I thought it should be. But there's a different way to look at it. What would happen if I took this glaze and it was not on the kli? If it was sitting here on the table by itself. Imagine if there was no kli and there was just glaze. Okay? Think about what I would have in my hand here. I'd have this thing that's, a fraction of an inch, it's a millimeter thick. Okay, I have this thin piece of glass, and what would happen to that? Obviously, it wouldn't be functional. Obviously, that thing would shatter into a million pieces. I couldn't put my lunch onto that. Obviously, it's completely worthless to have the glaze by itself. What does that say to me? That means is that the cheres, the base of the kli, is a maimed for the glass. The glass is completely not functional. If I have a lead coating in the Gemara, either because it's thicker or because it's lead, well, those are the same thing, but it has more durability by itself and it would stand there. It doesn't need the underbody in order to be a functional kli. But the glass that's on this kli, if this glass didn't have the ceramic underneath it, it wouldn't be useful at all. It wouldn't be a cup. I couldn't make a cup out of this thing and say, out of this little plastic like glass bag here that I'm putting my food into, it would be worthless. So what happens is that the cheres, the point of the thinness doesn't depend if it's relatively thin, it's whether it's objectively thin. If it's so thin that it can't stand by itself, if it's so thin it can't stand by itself, then the cheres is a maimed. And as we saw, the Shach says, we always care about the maimed. If the maimed is cheres or not cheres, we always say tefillah without a bracha when there's a maimed in play, one that needs and one that doesn't need. So even though the glass is a coating, and even though the glass is chayiv and tefillah, the Gemara says if the top coating is chayiv and tefillah, it's chayiv and tefillah. But if it's so thin that it needs the underneath to be a maimed, so the thinness says thin means that it couldn't hold itself up, and it needs this thing to be maimed. Or if it needs the thing to be maimed, then the Shach said that those things need tefillah. Now, I said last time, I conjecture, you can like it or not like it, that there's a machlokes here, the Gra and the Shach. And it follows, and later the Shulchan, the Aruch Shulchan says the minig is to follow like the Shulchan Aruch. But I said to you, seemingly, if it was a maimed, then the rules of maimed are always drabanan creation. That a maimed should be significant. So we're talking about here not more than a fiv in the case of the Shulchan Aruch, not more than a fiv of tefillah midrabanan. So maybe we should follow. Maybe we should. Say Safek Jabron L'Kula. If we Safek Jabron L'Kula over here, when the maimed is cheres and the kli is glass, that means it's tefillah without bracha. Okay, but in every case, that means it's Safek Jabron L'Kula, means do the tefillah but don't make the bracha. So in which case, that would be, the Pri Megadim doesn't say, but I see, doesn't say that he holds, whether he holds like the Shach or the Mechaber. He doesn't say which he holds. Pri Megadim's in our Keilim, it's not over here. He doesn't say. He actually brings them up, I forgot about that. He doesn't talk about what they hold like the Shach and the Mechaber. But it could be that thin is the reason why thin wouldn't be chayiv and tefillah would because thin means it can't stand by itself, and according to them the Shach and that shita, it only needs, that's why it has tefillah that bracha. Okay, let's put some aside now. So now we now have possible justifications for why people of Tevillas China without bracha. fact, that's what the CRC policy is. We talk about time of that bracha. Two possible explanations why that should be. It tends to revolve around the Pri Megadim, and we're trying to get a head to what that should be. Okay. Now we're going to move to a different kli, a related question. And the question? Okay. Teflon. Okay. Well, what is a Teflon pan, a Teflon frying pan? What does that mean? It's a metal pot. Basically, you start off with a plain old metal frying pan. They tend to be frying pans, so it could be anything. Start with a metal frying pan, and you spray on top of it. Essentially, you spray on top of it a plastic coating. Okay, obviously it's more complicated than that, but the short version of that is that what you're putting on top of that is a plastic coating. So let's think whether that should or shouldn't need fuel for that thing. So the Mechaber says, I only care what touches the food. Okay, that's what Mechaber says in Vav and Zion. He says, I don't care. What touching the food is plastic. Touches the food is plastic, don't touch it. Okay, I don't care that the whole thing is made out of metal. It doesn't make a difference. Good Mechaber, no tefillah. What about according to the others? Okay, what about according to the what we're calling a shach? Okay, that we depend on the maimed. So over here, clearly the metal is a maimed. Okay, couldn't fry anything in a plastic Teflon coating. I mean, you wouldn't get anything. Nothing. Obviously, you wouldn't get anything done with Teflon coating. So according to the shach, we would say feel that a bracha. Okay, that's what the shach would say is feel that a bracha.
Does the coating ever wear off?
It does wear off. So you say since I scraped off a layer, I get down to the bottom, and so I should tevel it. So when that happens, I should tevel it. You think I should tevel it before because of that? What am I going to do? Every time I scrape it off, run to the mikvah? That's an interesting question. So you say maybe I should tevel it even from the start, from the get-go.
I think this happens quite often.
It happens, yeah. Okay.
So maybe the feeling not good at that point.
It's a question. What are you saying? Is it valuable to do tefillah now when it's not touching the food? I'm not sure. I have to think about that. Okay, it actually has to be moved to by next time a little bit. Not a chatzitza, because the things that are supposed to be there when you use the kli are not a chatzitza. That's an interesting question. It's a little bit touched on something we'll do next time about that tefillah like that. Okay, I didn't think of it like that. Maybe you should tell you because of the metal that's going to touch your fingers. Okay, interesting. Okay, the Ramah said. I told you the Ramah, the way the Aruch Shulchan and the Aruch explain it is, the Ramah says we do tefillah without a bracha when the coating is just on the inside. If you put the coating just on one side, then it's l'noy, and you do tefillah without a bracha. So should we say the opposite over here? They were saying when the inside was chayiv in tefillah. What if the inside is what would ruin the tefillah? The inside is plastic. In the Ramah's case was the inside was metal. Here the inside is the plastic is on the coating. So should we say that the Ramah would say that's l'noy and we can ignore it and look at this as if it's a metal pot? Should we look at this as a metal? So that's my getting to that. In no way can you dream that this is l'noy. This is not l'noy. I mean, maybe it makes it look pretty, but that's not obviously it's super functional, right? You bought a Teflon pan because the Teflon coating makes the kli that much more functional. You could use the pan so much easier if it's a Teflon pan. Okay. The same thing, what we're saying in the Pri Megadim, that when things are super thin, not because they're inside, but just because they're thin in Illinois, of course, same thing. Same thing is that the thing is, it's thin, it's very, very thin, probably even thinner than this glaze, but it's not Illinois. Okay? So the only possibility of maybe saying you should do tefillah with bracha, I was able to squeeze out of was, I asked, Rabbi Friedman from here, said to me, he says, well, maybe the difference is that when you make a Teflon pan, you start off with a completely, fully functional frying pan. Think about it. You make a pan, you make the metal pan, that's the base of the thing, it's a metal pan. It's chayiv tefillah. You want to take it now, and you could fry an egg on it, you could cook a perfectly functional frying pan now, and it's chayiv tefillah. So now you want to take away the chayiv tefillah by putting the layer on top of it. He says maybe it's not so easy to take away the chayiv tefillah. Maybe you want to put on the chayiv tefillah is one thing. You build, the Shulchan Aruch's case is you build the barrel with wood and metal, whether inside or the outside. So the question is it chayiv tefillah or not chayiv tefillah? You have to judge it in its finished state. It's not worth anything beforehand. You want to talk about the cheres, you start with cheres, and now you put the layer on top, it should be chayiv tefillah. He says, but if I start off chayiv tefillah, I start off with a metal pan. It's a fully functional frying pan. And then I improve it by putting the plastic on top of it. Maybe then it's harder, and it's harder to rip out the chayiv tefillah. It's easier to, if you have the chayiv tefillah already, it's harder to rip it out. Okay? So that was, he wasn't talking then. But what I'm thinking is that would be our only possible, that I can think of, justification to say you should do tefillah with a bracha. In fact, that's the Shulchan policy. That's what we're trying to understand. I'm at the end. I don't have the answer to you. The current policy is we say China should be teviled without a bracha. We understand that. That we're able to explain that makes sense. And the other side of that is that Teflon coated things need tevillah with a bracha. And unless you're going to buy this thing that Rabbi Friedman is saying at the end, I can't give you a good explanation for that. Either it should be no tevillah at all, like the Mechaber says, zero tevillah, or it should be tevillah without a bracha, like the Shach, like things like that. You say it's a maimon, you can talk about tevillah without a bracha, but to say tevillah with a bracha, I'm not.
To establish our CRC policy with respect to Teflon.
That's a good question. I'm waiting for the video. But I don't hear a justification at this point for that.